Justice D.Y. Chandrachud
Secretary General, Supreme Court of India, Shri Pravash Prashun Pandey, Joint Secretary, Department of Justice, Shri Ashok Kumar, Department of Justice, Director, and the E-Committee. We have Ms. Salina Nair, Member Processes, Dr. Parvinder Singh Arora, Member Project Management, Shri Ashish Shirodankar, Member Systems, Arul Mohi Shelvi, Member Human Resources. We also have Mr. Rajiv Sharma and Ms. Anju Arora from the Chief Justice of India's Secretariat. My colleagues and I also welcome the 30 district judges of Odisha and one nodal officer from each of the 30 districts of Odisha who are present here at our special request to attend the conference and gain from its deliberations. My colleagues and I welcome all the CPCs from the various high courts who are the backroom boys who script and dialogue all that we have to say at the national conference, the presentations we are going to make here in the next 2 days. We welcome Shri Sunil Bansal, the Director General of Police, Odisha, Shri S.K. Priyadashi, the Commissioner of Police, Dr. Chayani, the Collector, Cuttack. As far as my recollection goes, the last national conference of the IT committees was held in Lucknow more than 6 years ago. The changes witnessed in the judiciary as a result of several ICT initiatives received a great fillip with the COVID-19 pandemic. Virtual hearings, live streaming, e-filing, paperless courts, digitization of court records are now no longer new initiatives. They have been launched in varying degrees across the high courts and even in some of the district courts in the states with a reasonable degree of success. No doubt it's a work in progress, but with the union government being most liberal in its financial support to the phase 3 of the e-courts project, the transformation would expectedly be complete in the near future. How we should go about the exercise of completing the task is one of the key points for discussion in this national conference. We are here to share our experiences, our achievements and best practices, our plans, and the challenges that we face in the various high courts in the implementation of such plans. It is expected that we also share the problems and challenges we face and what we do to overcome them. This is important because it is by now evident that the support of the state governments to the various high courts for the e-initiatives is not consistent across the board. Here, I must acknowledge that the government of Odisha has been extremely supportive of the initiatives of our High Court. We look forward to the sessions where, apart from the High Courts making their presentations, we will also benefit from the insights of the E-Committee, the Ministry of Law and Justice, the NIC, experts like Dr. Dinesh Katre and Dr. Vivek Raghavan. I would not dwell too much on what we should deliberate upon, except to flag a few issues that I think we should keep in mind. The first is data integrity and security. Even while we wait a comprehensive data protection law to be enacted, we must put our heads together, of course with the help of experts, to frame a comprehensive judicial data security policy, particularly since we are generating vast amounts of data on a daily and maybe even an hourly basis, and particularly since much of this data concerns the litigants in our courts and their most private and confidential details of their lives. It is important that while maintaining the integrity and security of the data and storing it on media that we control, we decide who can use it and how. For instance, we've had live streaming of several of the high courts in the country. And many of us have noticed in the YouTube clips of those live streamings being used by various actors, many of them private players, and with captions like angry judge and wonderful arguments and so on. But we must learn to control the use of such clips by users of the internet. And likewise, Gmail. Many of us still continue to use Gmail, which is a private service provider. So these are clearly matters of concern that we need to address. Much of it has been set out in the action plan. We must get down to the nuts and bolts of it. Also, Jeffrey Hinton, who last week resigned as Vice President of Google, has cautioned us about the uses of artificial intelligence. Even as we use it for our work of translation of judgments into regional languages, we may perhaps have to undertake a robust and intensive consultation with experts before we think of deploying AI for other purposes. I know there is already a committee set up by the Chief Justice of India for this purpose. The second issue is how we become self-reliant as an institution as far as the deployment of ITC for our work is concerned. We are far too dependent on external agencies for both our hardware and software, which can soon get and is in fact getting outdated at an alarming rate. I must acknowledge here that the services rendered to the judiciary for the last 2 decades and more by the National Informatics Center. But I would think that this is the time where we should think of constituting our own resource in this area. Concerns of redundancy and interoperability and continuity in preservation, use, and retrieval of data, all of this needs to be addressed. I mentioned a committee of which Justice Bindal was the chair, and 2 of my colleagues in the High Court and 1 of his colleagues in the Punjab and Haryana High Court. We submitted a report in 2018 on electronic evidence, storage, use, retrieval, and preservation and authenticating of electronic evidence. That is some report that will need to be examined in some depth by both the Ministry of Law and Justice and us. How can we build our core competencies in the area? How can we be more self-reliant as far as the internet connectivity and bandwidth availability across the country is concerned? Friends from the Northeast have pointed out how the internet connectivity is not uniform across the Northeast, and this needs to be addressed. Then the issue of training. I'm hoping that in these 2 days, we also do some backroom chatting so that we can share our experiences of training of judicial officers, lawyers, law clerks, and court staff. If the mission of transformation of the judiciary through ICT initiatives has to take place at a uniform rate, then some of these training modules need to be standardized. It has been 18 years since the first National Action Plan was rolled out by the E-Committee. The IT committees in the various high courts, as well as the E-Committee in the Supreme Court of India, has been very fortunate in the past 2 decades to have had judges with exceptional competence and vision whose unstinting efforts have brought us this far. We need to build on those efforts and then pass on the baton to the next generation of judges. A conference like this will go a long way in setting those goals. As our Chief Justice of India never tires of reminding us, all these measures ultimately must deliver better quality justice to the litigants and make the courts more accessible and user-friendly for everyone. It must make them more accountable and transparent in their functioning. It must lead us to delivering better on the progress towards equal and fair justice. While adding to Gandhiji's talisman, we would do well in the context of ICT initiatives to align them with our core constitutional values and beliefs, including the right to privacy, so well articulated by the Supreme Court of India in the Puttaswamy judgment. I wish this conference all success. I hope my dedicated team of officers led by the Registrar General of the High Court of Odisha, the registrars and other officials, and the huge army of staff have been able to cater to all your comforts. If there are any shortcomings, the responsibility lies with me. You will kindly excuse us for that. Thank you and Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir, for the warm and heartfelt welcome extended to our honorable guests and esteemed dignitaries, and highlighting the issues to be dealt with in the course of this national conference. Under the able guidance of His Lordship, Odisha State Judiciary has taken clear and concrete steps in the arena of digitization, paperless courts, and e-initiatives. It is my privilege to now request His Lordship, Honorable Shri Justice Rajesh Bindal, Judge, Supreme Court of India, to kindly address this august gathering.
Honorable Dr. D.Y. Chanchal, Chief Justice of India, Dr. S. Muralidhar, Chief Justice of Odisha High Court, Judges of Odisha High Court, Justice Bipin Sanghi, Chief Justice Uttarakhand High Court, Justice Tilok Singh Chauhan, Acting Chief Justice of Himachal High Court, other honorable judges from all different high courts who are heading or are members of the computer committees there, officers of the Registry of the Supreme Court, members from the Department of Justice, members of the E-Committee of the Supreme Court, chairpersons of the district computer committees, CPCs from all different high courts, Nodal officers for digitization, Advocate General and Solicitor General and Office Bearers of the Odisha High Court Bar Association, officers from the OCAC, Bhubaneswar, other judicial officers from Odisha, police officers, print and mass media, ladies and gentlemen. Namaskar, very good morning to all present. I think this is the most welcome initiative taken by Dr. Muralidhar. We should all thank to him and his team for making this possible. First conference was held in Lucknow in 2017. I think many of us may have attended that, and I was lucky to be there at that time. And the second was in Chandigarh in 2018. Thereafter, there is a gap of 4 years. 2 years, yes, we have lost in COVID, but still there were online meetings during that period also, but not at this level. But what I think is that this type of conference should be an annual affair so that we have the opportunity to share our experiences, and the discussion on way forward should be there, as is one of the sessions in this conference also. As Brother Muralidhar said that fortunately I had the opportunity to work in 4 high courts. And what my experience shows that all the high courts are not at the same level in computerization. In fact, this is the difficulty, one of the, I think, major difficulty in proceeding further in this process. Unless we are at the same page, we can't proceed further because the balance is not there. The reason may be that there is shortage of funds, and Odisha, Brother Muralidhar said there is no shortage of funds. In some states, yes, it is not there. In Punjab, Haryana also at that time, we hardly faced the problem of shortage of funds, but in some states it is there. So that has to be sorted out. But what we have experienced is that a lot of funds sent by the E-Committee also are not utilized by the High Court, despite repeated reminders from them. So this is one part. I think all the chairpersons and members of the E-Committees in the different high courts have to be a little proactive. And if we are proactive, the way forward is available, because guidance from the E-Committee is always available. This is, I think, we should see. And in Odisha, if you go and visit the center where the digitization is being done, or their museum, you will find that how a leadership can make a change. So this is, I think, we should take this idea from. Now, another problem which I saw was that we have the officers from NIC who are taking care of our system. Brother Muralidhar had touched that. Why not have our own cadre or own system for that instead of depending on NIC? My experience in J&K shows that we had an officer from NIC who was there in the court for 17 years. And in fact was not working. That's why a lot of projects could not be taken care of. When we got him changed, another officer came who did not have the domain knowledge at all of the judicial system. So firstly, we had to teach him for about 6 months, and then thereafter he could take up the issues. So this is one major problem, I think, which we are facing. Because when some officer is changed, he will not have domain knowledge of computerization in the courts. He will have to learn a lot of things, and then only he can deliver. So this is, I think, one of the major area, how we sort it out. We need to see that. Now today's conference, we see the title given is Digitization, Paperless Courts and E-Initiatives. There are 3 parts now: digitization, paperless court, E-Initiative. So what is meant by digitization? Digitization is only to convert your hard copies to soft copies. There are a lot of benefits. I'll not go into this. We all normally read them or know all of them, space and all that. So use of that data. Transmission also. But if you see the NJDG website, because transmission of record is also one of the major issues. The cases are taken to the higher court. About 8% cases are delayed only because of transmission of data. Now, if you have the digitized records, the transmission is very easy and it saves a lot of time. And in one of the cases, probably Supreme Court had to direct the high courts to do it very fast, though there are directives or guidance from the E committee, but recent judgment also it had to be observed. And in the Supreme Court, what we see is that whenever we summon the soft copy of the record, we immediately supply the same to the counsels also, so that there is better assistance of the counsel if he has the record of the case. So there is nothing wrong in this. I think we need to move from digitization to digitalization. And the meaning of that, which I read, is the quality use of that data, intelligent use of that data. Because we have a lot of dump of our data after scanning or lot of issues. Now, the result of that intelligent use may be we have better analysis, better planning, artificial intelligence. Yes, there are a lot of issues which are reading in artificial intelligence. The European Union has come out with law or something. The day before yesterday, I read probably the president of US had called the top guns of IT, the Google, and I think Microsoft also for a meeting on AI. There are a lot of issues going on because this is taking over like anything, because there are a lot of chances of misuse of all this. And efficiency, yes, it will be increased. So how we do it, like bunching, categorization, there are a lot of benefits we can have, because in this session, much time is not there, so I will not go into that detail. But we have to move toward digitalization in that. And what we see, this is being used like insurance also, airline ticketing, you see the dynamic, and a lot of government schools, a lot that this is already being used. We had used this AI part, automation, in the virtual courts. Still, it is not there throughout the country, so that shows the initiative part is little less. We have this in 19 states. Benefit is there because in Allahabad also we started it, the big state, 75 districts, so we had only 10 virtual courts for traffic challans. So this is how the judicial officers can be saved from being busy in this traffic part only and do the other work. The data shows that we received about 3 crore challans in that system, out of which very small number, 2.0 lakh 8 were contested, and a fine of 397 crores was paid. This is a huge amount. And it was paid only in 36.73 lakh cases. So rest 2.30 crore cases, the fine was not paid, though the challans were settled by the officer. Now, what I learned is that the details of all these cases which were settled were sent to the RTO. Now, the problem is the RTO will not have the details of all those vehicles. They may not have the mobile number or email ID. The vehicles may have been registered long back. I think this also has to be taken care of. Unless the challan amount is paid, we track the owner of the vehicle. There is no use of it because people are happy. Challan is there, but nothing. A lot of these challans come from CCTV cameras on the traffic light. In fact, where they don't have anything, details. It's not manual challaning. But I was thinking, I had a word with Mr. Ashish also. We need to integrate our system or take the help of IRDA. Because IRDA insurance part is the annual affair of any vehicle. And at that time, we all know, we have a lot of vehicles ourselves. Mobile number and email ID of every owner of the vehicle is taken. So there you have the current data. If you integrate the system and take help from them, I think we can execute this better. So this is one thing which I thought of, we should do it. And another problem, which in J&K we had developed a
देखुले कटक जुडिशियल एकाडेमी रे स्वतंत्र कार्यक्रम जारी रही बर्तमान समय गोटे छोट ब्रेक पर फेरु
CV Raman Global University, Odisha, homegrown, world class.
OSL is a trusted service provider in different sectors across various industries. Our expertise in achieving and delivering the best. It's not just a habit, it is a way of life. OSL Group.
अंकल सब ठीक?
बढ़िया।
पानी डालते रहेगा?
हाँ बिल्कुल। हंस के सहेगा रहेगा हमेशा।
पापा आपके लिए अच्छा घर बना रहे हैं ना?
मेरे लिए नहीं, मेरे बच्चों के लिए।
घर आखिर अपने लिए कौन बनाता है? घर तो अपनों के लिए होता है। बांगड़ पावर सीमेंट, अपनों के लिए, हमेशा के लिए।
पिले आमे शिखिबा भाषा स्वाभिमानर
आत्मनिर्भर हेबो भारत एकता हेबो अभिमानर आत्मनिर्भर हवे
अरे बा एमन कुआडे जाउछन्ते? हां मु भी आत्मनिर्भर हेबी किंतु केमिति? लुहा तंबा खनिज सबु मिले एई धर गर्भरु एते आशीर्वाद मिलुछि एई धरार कण कणरु प्रतिटी प्रयोजन आमर जेबे पूरा करि पारिबा
आत्मनिर्भर भारतर आमे सेबे मूल धुआ पकाइबा आत्मनिर्भर
कृतज्ञ आमे एई धरार जी आमको देउछि एल्युमिनियम स्टील रूपा जिंक तंबा तैल आ गैस परि वरदान कोण आमर धरार एही आशीर्वाद को आमे देश सेवा लागि करिबु अर्पण देशर आवश्यकता पाई आत्मनिर्भर भारत पाई वेदांत।
ब्रेक पर स्वागत। पुरी रे विभिन्न उन्नयनमूलक कार्यर समीक्षा करछन्ती 5T सचिव भिके पांड्यान। प्रथमे श्रीमंदिर रे श्रीजीव को दर्शन करबा परे परिक्रमा प्रकल्प कार्यर अनुध्यान करथिले। सिंहद्वार सम्मुखरु एमार मठ चकड अंचल एथिसहित काकुडी खाई होई दक्षिण द्वार रे जारी रहितबा निर्माण कार्यर समीक्षा करथिले। परे पश्चिम और उत्तर द्वार रे जारी रहितबा परिक्रमा प्रकल्पर आउटर रोड कार्य अग्रगति संपर्क में पचारि बुझा सहित उत्तर द्वार निकट में चलता विभिन्न जोन रास्ता संपर्क में अनुध्यान करते। 75 मीटर सुरक्षा वलय मध्य निर्माणाधीन परिक्रमा प्रकल्पर बाहर रास्ता कार्य रथयात्रा पूर्व शेष करने को निर्देश देते 5T सचिव। एसह कार्यर अग्रगति संपर्क में पुरी जिलापाल और उपजिलापाल समेत निर्माणकारी संस्थार अधिकारी सहित आलोचना करते। प्रकल्प निर्माण कार्य बुली देखा 5T सचिव श्री सेतु निर्माण कार्य अनुध्यान करते। यार निर्माण अग्रगति को नहीं संतोष प्रकट करथिले। श्री सेतु निर्माण करथिबा संस्थार अधिकारी माने 5T सचिव को नक्शा देखाई निर्माण संपर्क में विस्तृत भाव बुझाइथिले। प्रति सप्ताह 5T सचिव पुरी गस्त करे विभिन्न प्रकल्पर अग्रगति संपर्क में समीक्षा करुछन्ति, जाहाको स्वागत करिसन्ति पुरीवासी और श्रद्धालु।
परिक्रमा प्रोजेक्ट जेहेतु आपको रथयात्रा अच्छी एवं जो तार फ्रंट पर्सन जो काम दायित्व दि जाइए ओबीसीसी और टाटा को एवं से जो टाइमलाइन भितर जो जगह खंड लाइट पकड़ा कथा एवं आमर जो पिचु काम जो होची ताको कि कंप्लीट करेंगे एवं जो जो पर्सन आउटर परिक्रमा पाथ रही से आउटर परिक्रमा पाथ कि रथ पूर्व कंप्लीट हो पार एवं तांकर किसी बोटलनेक अच्छी कि सब उपर आलोचना करी आज निर्देश दिखाई आउटर परिक्रमा कार्य होची सरिया से काम जो भाया हूँ कौन डेभोटीज मान रथयात्रा असुविधा न हो से जिन को आखि आगे रखिक दक्षिण द्वार जेहेतु ईटीपी प्लांट होम शिफ्ट हो ईटीपी प्लांट हूँ नुआ जगह कंस्ट्रक्शन चलती जो एनएमए अप्रूवाल नालापर तेणुक जेहेतु ये कम हो मेसीनरी कम रही तेणुक बाहर तक प्रोक्योरमेंट होती कि जल्दी सरी पार से जुलाई मास धार्य कर आउ जो कम रही जेहेतु से लोक जाऊँगी मंदिर रोचे चलाचल मानने लोक भक्त मान रही से टाइमलाइन भितर कि सरी पार से निर्देश दिखाई। श्री सेतु निहती आप पुरी को देखुए जो श्री सेतु ट्रम्पेट ब्रिज जो रही गोटे नुआ हूँ जोड़ी हे फर्दर कारण यही जगार हूँ डायरेक्ट लोक जगन्नाथ बोले पार्किंग प्लेस को जापारे से पाखापाखि जो प्लेसेस रही से पाखापाखि बहुत गाड़ी रही पार भक्त मैंने डायरेक्टली से जगार हूँ मंदिर को जापारे जहाँफल कि जो आगुरी जो गाड़ी जाम होता बाटर असुविधा होता हो पार गोटे गोटे पर्सन जो पिचु कम करने कथा से पर्सन अलरेडी ओबीसीसी से सारिया रही नेक्स्ट बेक प्लानिंग रही फाइनाली हूँ टच है कि नहीं से जिन देखा समस्त टाइमलाइन फिक्स कराई
रिव्यू करियमित बेसिस रिव्यू कराऊँ 5T सचिव जो आसुँच से रेगुलाली समीक्षा करें चेष्टा करुँ बाहर परिक्रमा को आगे तुरंत रथयात्रा पूर्व समाप्त करें जद्वारा कि यात्री मान मुवमेंट असुविधा हेनी कथा बढ़ ये तो अनेक गुड़िया कार्य अच्छी सांगे सांगे सबुड़ संभव नुहे तेना आम आशा करूँ बाहर काम आगे सारू भीतर काम हम।
राष्ट्रपति तीन दिनिया ओडिशा गस्तर आज होची शेष दिन अंतिम दिन में महाराजा श्री रामचंद्र भंजदेव विश्वविद्यालय समावर्तन उत्सव में सामिल हेबे राष्ट्रपति सेठारे छात्र छात्री उद्देश्य दीक्षांत भाषण देबे। ए अवसर में मांकेडिया लोधा आदि केतेक आदिम जनजातिर प्रतिनिधि भेटे राष्ट्रपति। एथिसह 90 जन गवेषकों को पीएचडी उपाधि और 8 जन व्यक्तिविशेष को डिलीट 34 जन कृति छात्र छात्री को स्वर्ण पदक प्रदान करेंगे। पर अपराह्न नुआ दिल्ली फेरीचे राष्ट्रपति। राष्ट्रपति हेबा परे प्रथम थर करी जन्ममाटी रे आसिथिले महामहिम निज गाँ पहाड़पुर जाई स्वर्गत श्यामचरण मुर्मू प्रतिमूर्ति रे माल्यार्पण करथिले। एथिसह विभिन्न कार्यक्रम में जोग देथिले। सेभଳି गतकाली द्वितीय दिन में रायरंगपुर स्थित शिव मंदिर जगन्नाथ मंदिर परिदर्शन पर पंडित रघुनाथ मुर्मू समाधिपीठ में श्रद्धांजलि देथिले। एसहित शिमिलीपाल बुली देखिथिले। फेल मारिला बीजेपी चाल चाषी को ढाल करी राजनीति उद्यम हेला विफल। झारसुगुड़ा उपनिर्वाचन को आउ दिन केटा बाकी थिबा बेले कोलाबिरा ब्लॉक अंचलर किछि चाषी को विभ्रांत करी भोट पर्जन पई चक्रांत करिथिला बीजेपी। समासिंगा पंचायत सोडामाल भेडेन नदी कूल थिबा मेगा उठा जलसेचन प्रकल्प को कार्यकारी करने को दाबी करथिले चाषी। भोट पर्जन पई बीजेपी चाषी को उस्काउथिबा अभियोग होइथिला। ए संपर्क में अवगत होगा पर चाषी निकट में पहुंची तुरंत समस्यार समाधान पाई प्रतिश्रुति देइछंती जलसंपद मंत्री टुकुनी साहू और अर्थमंत्री निरंजन पुजारी। चाषी पाखरे पहुंची समस्या संपर्क में अनुध्यान कर स्थायी समाधान पाई प्रतिश्रुति देइछंती। एथिरे चाषी माने संतोष प्रकाश करने सहित राज्य सरकार को ऊपर भरोसा रखिथिबा प्रकाश करछंती। समस्यार समाधान पाई प्रतिश्रुति पर भोट वर्जन निष्पत्ति ओहरिछंती चाषी।
2018 मसीह आम ये दाबी कर आसुचु जलसेचन प्रकल्प मेघा जलसेचन प्रकल्प यहाँ कार्यकारी नहीं हवा जिंदा बन्या हेले से प्रकल्प चलसी मुरली टाइम चलाए ना कार्यकारी नुहे जेन पानी दरकार नहीं था चलवा से लगे बोलिक आम भोट वर्जन करवा लगी निष्पत्ति नहीं आउ मंत्री आज निजे आसिक प्रतिश्रुति देले आम स्वास्थ्य मंत्री तथा आम अर्थमंत्री से प्रतिश्रुति देले टुकनी साहू जल संपद मंत्री आमर अर्थमंत्री आम विश्वास करा बोलिक मुख्यमंत्री कारण के निश्चित भाव में गले यहाँ सियोर हो पार्बा बोले विश्वास
काले आमर जेने अनशन होता से आमर जल संपद मंत्री टुकनी साहू एवं राजस्व अर्थमंत्री निरंजन पुजारी आम पार्टी आते से एसुरांस दे तो आम कोड अफ कंडक्ट लगी जाइए और यार पर आम स्टेप नहीं आप समस्या आम दूर करदेमु बोली कहले आम आमर ये कंडक्ट करदेलु। बीजेपी जो अपचेष्टा जो चलूला से प्रकृत भ्रांत धारणा आम कौन से कौशल संगठन से तार किसी भूमिका नहीं आम प्रकृत भोट वर्जन करवा चाहूँ मुझे स्पष्ट भाव में कहीदे कौन प्रकार बीजेपी किसी प्रभाव पड़ो नहीं संपूर्ण भाव में जो मतदान जो पाखापाखि 80 ରୁ 85% मतदान जो हम मोर हिसाब से 75% आम निश्चित भाव में पाइबू और कोलाबिरा ब्लॉक में अधिक अधिक 9टा पंचायत रू सब पंचायत में बीजेडी विपुल विजय हो जेन मेगा पॉइंट अच्छे जेन कि सक्सेस नहीं पारि फ्लो नहीं रहा पानी सेना प्रायोरीटी रे आम बेरेज करमा बोली सरकार निष्पत्ति नहीं तेणु ये प्रोजेक्टा फिजिबल हो मोर हिसाब से निश्चित भाव वाटर रिसोर्स मंत्री मोर संगे भी आसी से भी कहते जगह फिजिबल अच्छे सरकार निष्पत्ति अच्छे चलित बजेट रे गोटे ह्यूज अमाउंट बेरेज लगी दिखाई तेणु चाषी भाई मान को मुझे गोटे कमिटी करके बारंबार सरकार संगे आलोचना करके निर्यास के पहुँचाबार लगे मुझे अनुरोध कर राजी जाए।
बलांगीर जिला देवगाँ में दुर्घटना रे ड्राइवर जीवंत दग्ध घटना मृतक होती देवगढ़ जिला तिलेबणीर जगन्नाथ मुंडा। गतकाली राति बलांगीर टिटलागढ़ रास्ता देवगाँ हाईस्कल छक निकट में पिकअप और ट्राक्टर मुहांमुही धक्का हो जली जाइथिला। केसिंगारू संबलपुर आंब नहीं जाउथबा बेले घटिथिला दुर्घटना। दुर्घटना पर गाड़ी जली जाई जीवंत दग्ध हो जाइथिले जगन्नाथ। मे मासर प्रथम शनिवार को विश्व आक्सियल सिंड्रिकल थ्राइट्स बा गंठी बात निराकरण दिवस भाव पालन करा जाउछि। ए रोग रे सबु वर्गर सबु बयसर व्यक्ति आक्रांत होइतांती तेबे अवहेला कारणरू बहु संख्यार युवपीढ़ी एथिरे आक्रांत होइछन्ती। एहा द्वारा सिरोसिस और दृष्टिशक्ति हराइबा आशंका रही। सबुठ बड़ कथा महिला क्षेत्र में यह रोग निदान कर अधिक समय लगी था। एणु सुस्थ और सरल जीवन यापन करने सठिक निदान और आगुआ चिकित्सा कले एथिरु मुक्ति मिल पार। यह बार्ता देवा उद्देश्य ओडिशा आर्थराइटिस एंड रिमोटोलॉजी फाउंडेशन पक्षर एक सचेतनता शोभायात्रा अनुष्ठित होती। शहीदनगर स्थित ओएआरसी परिसर डॉक्टर ज्योतिरंजन परिडा नेतृत्व में एक सचेतनता शोभायात्रा बाहरी रूपाली छक दे पुणी ओएआरसी रे पहुंची। एथिरे बहु डॉक्टर एवं नर्सिंग छात्र छात्री स्वेच्छासेवी सक्रिय अंशग्रहण करथिले।
एक्सियल स्पॉन्डिलोआर्थराइटिस गोटे एमती रोग जोटा कम बयस स्टार्ट हुए। तो सबुठ इंपोर्टेंट आप कौन सचेतनता दरकार कारण आपन देखिए जो 20 ରୁ 30 वर्ष भितर साधारण पुरुष मैंने अधिक अफेक्टेड होती। तो 20 ରୁ 30 वर्ष पिला को जदि सका उठिले अंटा पेन हो जोड़ा किसी दिन किसी समय कम दाम कलापर भल लगुच तो यहीटा कौटना कौटी आंकाइलोजिंग स्पॉन्डिलाइटिस लक्षण हो पाए। आपको जदि ठीक टाइम एड्रेस न करा जाए यही रोग को जदि ठीक टाइम डायग्नोसिस कर चिकित्सा न करा जाए ताहले एटा डिफॉर्मिटी रूप निए।
कटकर भंड बाबा केफ खान 4 दिनिया रिमांड अवधि आज शेष दिन रिमांड रे ठकेईर सत उगारुछि अभियुक्त। गत 3 दिन ठकेई राकेटर चेर सहित आर्थिक कारबार तदंत करिछि पुलिस। माराथन जेरारे राज्य बाहर लिंक और मध्यस्थी बाबद भी तदंत होइछि। विभिन्न कंपनी रे लगाइथिबा लक्षाधिक टंकार कागजपत्र जगतपुर थिबा जमी दामी कार बाइक जबत होइछि। नोटबंदी समय कोटी टंका कोलकाता कटक आनिथिला भंड बाबा। झारसुगुड़ा उपनिर्वाचन पर जोरदार होबार लगी प्रचार आज को मिसाई हाथ में आउ 3 दिन शेष मुहूर्त में जनता दिल जीतवा उद्यम करुछंती सबु दल। सकाळु सकाळु चा खटी चली चर्चा बीजेडी सपक्ष में मत देउछंती जनता। आम सहित शत्रुघ्न जोड़ी सीधासख शत्रुघ्न पाखक जा। शत्रुघ्न 3 राजनैतिक दल प्रचार को जेहेतु कम समय रही जोरदार प्रचार कर विभिन्न स्थान में रैली डोर टू डोर कैंपेनिंग भी होची। आज दीपाली दास प्रचार को बेस जोरदार करथिबा नै देखा मिली। को स्थान में आज प्रचार करा जाउची रैली होची।
देखंतु आज झारसुगुड़ा ब्लॉक रो जो सिंघाबागा रही प्रचार करने पर वर्तमान धीरे धीरे अन्य जो पंचायत रही से पंचायत को वर्तमान जाऊँगी एवं वर्तमान आप देखिए जामेरा विलेज जोटि की वर्तमान प्रचार कार्य को जोरदार करुछंती दीपाली सहित अच्छा बीजेडी नेत्री श्रीमयी मिश्र अच्छा स्थानीय लोकंकर विपुल समर्थन देखा मिली। विधायक ब्रज प्रधान सहित अच्छा आप देखुवे सीधासख चित्र किभली भाव में गाँव में प्रचार चली। तो आज अंचल विभिन्न अंचल जाइए लोक प्रचार कर आज ये जो जामेरा विलेज लोकों समर्थन
आज आम जमेरा विलेज जमेरा गाँव में आसचु लोकंर समर्थन बहुत अच्छी। आप देखिपारे माँ मैंने आशीर्वाद दौरान फूल बरसाउंट से फूल आशीर्वाद संगे सामान तो बहुत खुशी लगुच।
आशा करते लोक समर्थन मिले
बापा प्रति लोकप्रियता आगु थिला। देखु माननीय मुख्यमंत्री जो भाव में महिला काम कर मो बापा लोकप्रियता ये सबू जिनस गुरुत्वपूर्ण डेफिनेटली भाव में केवे भाभी नी मत एत भल पाइबे कहीं
लोकों जोड़ी
सुख दुख में साथी हेबी समस्या गुड़ाक माननीय मुख्यमंत्री तक पहुँचाइबी। झी गोटे झील जमी माँ को सेवा करे सेमती भाव में सेवा करे।
विरोधी व्यक्तिगत आक्षेप करुचंती विरोधी
मत किसी फरक पड़नी मुझे जानी मो प्रसंग कौन आई विल वर्क ऑन माय गोल नथिंग एल्स से माने कही था तो आग को बढ़ी दियो
झील भाई जो आशीर्वाद दौरान
बहुत खुशी लगुच। मुझे कहली मुझे भाभी नी मत एत भल पाइबे मत निज नातुणी भाया ट्रीट कर तो मो पाटे गोटे बहुत गर्वर कथा।
अनेक वृद्धा आम देखुचे कांदी पकाउछंती नवदादा आसुले आमको सीधासख कथा
कौन कौन
अनेक वृद्धा माने निजे स्वतः प्रभुत्व भाव में कांदी पकाउछंती।
बापा प्रति जो भल पाइबा थिला आज भी अच्छी। मो बापा को से निज पुओ भाया देखुले तो मत नातुणी भाया देखुले बापा जीवार जिते मत दुख अच्छी भी अच्छी।
काली मुख्यमंत्री आसुचंती केते आपनक भितर केते
एक्साइटेड अच्छी मो बापा आसुचंती मो पई प्रचार करिया पई आज यदि बापा बची थांते ताले से मध्य मो पई करू थांते तो मुख्यमंत्री मो बापा को भलिया मो सहित ठिया आइचंती
माने चाहउचंती मुख्यमंत्री कोन कहिबे
झारसुगुड़ा वासी मुख्यमंत्री को बहुत भल पाती आज काली आसुचंती माननीय मुख्यमंत्री झारसुगुड़ा वासी बहुत एक्साइटेड तांको देखिया पाई मो पाई कोन कहिबे समस्त बहुत खुशी अछि
निश्चित भाव में आप दीपाली प्रतिक्रिया शुणुले कि भाव में लोक समर्थन रही केते समर्थन देखुं दीपाली
निश्चित भाव में देखुवे लोक मान आग्रह नवोदय को जमी भल पाते लोक मैंने झील दीपाली दास के भी भल पाचन विकास करवार लगी आज दीपाली के जन मुख्यमंत्री आगे कैंडिडेट कर लगी आज उत्साह देखुवे ये अंचल जे जनता हूँ नवोदय सेवा जोगाउले आमर दीपाली दास सेवा जोगेबे अंचल विकास करबे सेतिल लगी
निश्चित भाव में आप शुणुले ब्रज प्रधान प्रतिक्रिया आप देखुं जे विजु जनता दल प्रार्थी को किभली भाव में जितेबा एवं जो लोक समर्थन रही
वर्तमान झारसुगुड़ा रे कैंपेनिंग जोरदार चली विभिन्न स्थान में बीजेडी कैंपेनिंग करुछि तीन दल मध्य प्रचार को जोरदार करिसेन बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद शत्रुघ्न आब सहित जोड़ी होइतले सीधा सलक आपन को नौछि जुडिशियल एकेडमी रे स्वतंत्र कार्यक्रम जारी रही
हाई कोर्ट the secretary department of justice Shri Rahate, Mr. Prasun Pandey, Mr. Ashok Kumar from the Department of Justice, district judges, CPCs, E-committee members who have traveled all the way from Delhi to be here. Mr. Ashish Radhonkar is here, Shalina is here, Arulmoni is here, Parvinder is here, the Learned Advocate General of Odisha, senior officers of the state, and ladies and gentlemen. Before I get into the more serious and even boring parts of my presentation, I must tell you that I was intrigued by this very distinct American twang in the neutral citations commentary. When Chief Justice Muralidhar whispered in my ear that that's the product of artificial intelligence. This is not a human agency, not an Indian trying to put on an accent. So I'm sure that you know the genesis of that. But it tells you what the enormous potential of technology is today. I have a few slides this morning to make my presentation. I thought of making a few slides because there's a great danger and tendency that when the Chief Justice of India speaks to the family of judges, you tend to meander into so many issues which are present in my mind and which I work every single day of my working day as a Chief Justice. There's a grave danger that I might break into issues which are of concern to me and not strictly relevant to this conference. So I thought I'll keep my own focus, so to speak, by having a few slides. And I've divided my slides into three areas. The first is the vision of phase 3. The second is the major activities which we want to envisage. And third, the roadmap. Now, what was the genesis of this conference? I think I have become a very constant visitor to Bhubaneswar and Cuttack. Not the least of the reasons for which is that I'm proudly regarded as the son-in-law of Orissa because my wife is an Oriya. But quite apart from that, I think the reason for my coming here so repeatedly is this dynamic engagement of Chief Justice Muralidhar with technology and the E-Courts project in our common mission to ensure that access to justice devolves to common citizens. So our purpose in pitchforking technology, and I believe I've pitchforked it as a central point of my mission as Chief Justice of India, is not to use technology to place it as some silo away from our citizens, but to ensure that we use technology to reach out to common citizens across the country. But the genesis of this conference was in my earlier visits to this beautiful state. And I was struck by the initiatives which have been taken by Chief Justice Muralidhar, whether it was in terms of the RRDC, which I had the pleasure of being associated with, or whether it was in terms of opening up virtual courts in all the districts in Odisha. Now I'm told by the learned Chief Justice that as many as 20 districts have virtual courts where lawyers can address the High Court sitting in their own districts. So technology has really obliterated, in that sense, the need for benches of the High Courts. Because you have a bench of the High Court in as many districts as you have set up virtual courts. And look at the enormous impact which this has. I say, speaking of my own court, that the Supreme Court of India is not the Supreme Court of Tilak Mark, but it's the Supreme Court for India, of India, by India. Likewise, each High Court is not really a High Court for the metropolitan capital of that state. Setting up these virtual courts across districts has enabled the Odisha High Court to truly be representative of the entire state, to ensure that there is access to justice for citizens across the state who want access to the High Court. Some of the finest lawyers are not necessarily lawyers who are confined to the capital cities of the states. Many of them don't move to the capital cities for lack of resources, for family reasons, for a variety of reasons that they are confined to their own districts. So why should they not have access to presenting their cases before the High Court? My experience in the Supreme Court is that when we have lawyers from across India now presenting arguments, both during the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond, the only thing that they may lack perhaps is the swagger or the verve of people who regularly approach us in the Supreme Court. But they certainly have confidence, they have knowledge, and they have that close connect with their own litigants, their clients, who trust them. So the genesis of this conference began when I visited RRDC and I spoke to my good friend Murli. And I requested Murli, I said, was it not time for us to ensure that we unveil what you have done in terms of digitization for high courts across the country so that they can share our best practices? And that's how this conference came into being. Now, the vision of the e-courts project is to provide affordable, accessible, cost-effective, environmentally sustainable, transparent, and an accountable justice delivery system. Each of these phrases is not just a phrase of art or a label, but it signifies the core of our mission of reaching out to citizens, of replacing what was the earlier colonial model of the administration of justice, under which citizens had to reach out to courts. We seek to now replace it with a model where we reach out to citizens and allow us to provide every kind of resource and service to our citizens. Now, if you look at the outlay for phase 3 of the e-courts project, which is going to be between 2023 to 2027, the total outlay which we have envisaged is 7,210 crores. Of it, the outlay for 2023-24 is 2,024 crores, or nearly 2,025. 2024-25, 2,109.6. 2025-26, 1,523 crores. And 2026-27, 1,552 crores. Compare it with the outlays in phase 1 and phase 2. The outlay for phase 1 and phase 2 combined was a fraction of the outlay for phase 3. And perhaps phase 1 and phase 2 was no more than the outlay for the first year of the e-courts project in phase 3. So we can now look at the enormity of the funds which the government of India is providing to us. I must share with all of you, all our sisters and brothers, particularly who are here from the high courts, that when we pitched for this budget, the union government responded, the Ministry of Finance, and we were ably assisted by the Department of Justice, responded by not even making a cut of a single rupee in the funds which we envisaged. because the importance of this was that we presented it properly. We were able to explain to the financial arms of the government on what the benefits would be in terms of this outlay which we propose for the Indian judiciary. Initially, during our meetings with the Ministry of Finance last year, the view was expressed that let this be a centrally sponsored scheme in which the center and the states would bear their own shares. But our experience in the past has not been uniform across the country. During the course of the 14th Finance Commission, there was a devolution, the increased devolution from 32 to 42%. But the experience which was gained in the course of the 14th Finance Commission, and this was noted in the report of the 15th Finance Commission, is that despite the increased devolution, the states were not willing to share funds with their judiciaries. And there was no way that the high courts to tap these funds. So both the Department of Justice and the E-Committee of the Supreme Court impressed upon the Ministry of Finance that if this project is truly to achieve its mission, and particularly having regard to the fact that phase 1 and phase 2 were 100% funded by the union government, the same principle should be followed for phase 3. And that is how it is going to be. 100% is going to be provided by the union government. During the course of a meeting which I held with the Department of Justice just a few days ago, and I'm sure both Mr. Rahate as well as Mr. Prasun Pandey and Mr. Ashok Kumar would be sharing these details with you. There are two options which the Department of Justice and the Expenditure Finance Committee has created. The first option, which is Model 1, is the default option. The default option envisages that the entirety of the funds would of course be provided by the union government and channelized through the E-Committee. But at the same time, this would cover the specifications which we lay down for the entirety of the country. The second, which is Model 2, which is very innovative and which is something which I'm sure all of the judges here who are chairpersons of the ICT committee and the Chief Justices would like to devote themselves, after it is explained in greater detail by the representatives of the Department of Justice. Model 2 envisages something which I've been hearing from our colleagues across India. Model 2 envisages that if a state wants to go in for higher specifications, a state, for instance, feels that I don't want to be constricted by the minimum standards or the threshold standards which have been laid down as part of the e-courts project, but my budgetary outlays are going to be higher and my state government is willing to provide that. Chief Justice Muralidhar has always mentioned to me, for instance, that the state of Odisha has been extremely forthcoming on the needs of the Odisha judiciary in terms of ICT initiatives. The state of Kerala has also been at the forefront. I know, as a matter of fact, that the state of Madhya Pradesh has been extremely hospitable to the demands of the judiciary. Several other states have been. Other states which are not named are woefully behind the tangent. So if there are states and if there are high courts which are able to get higher commitment of funds, then Model 2 envisages that you can increase your specifications, you can set higher targets. In fact, I have constituted an advisory committee consisting of Justice Rajiv Shakdar, Justice Suraj Govindraj, Justice Raja Vijay Raghavan, and Justice Anup Chitkara. Part of it was selfish because as Chief Justice of India, I can devote only so much time now for the E-Committee, but I don't want to cede control over this mission of mine. But the committee has been constantly telling me that their high courts have done much better work than what has been envisaged by the E-Committee. At a certain level, we require national uniformity. At the same time, national uniformity does not account for the fact that there are high courts which are far ahead of the curve. So Model 2 will really, in that sense, take into account these concerns of the high courts, that let the e-courts project not be a constraining influence on our activities, but a source for providing a minimum standard for the entirety of the nation, a uniformity, which, while providing for the basic needs of states, especially the cash-strapped high courts and their district judiciaries, do not operate as a sort of a constraining influence. Now, what are the major activities of Phase 3? The first, and that I want to emphasize, is the creation of digital infrastructure. Digitization is envisaged, the budget is close to 2,038 crores. Technological advancements, cloud infrastructure, cloud storage has a budget of 1,205 crores. Digital preservation, access to critical services that I'm going to be speaking of very shortly, and change management. Among other activities, you have software development, which is about 243 crores. Now, there are 24 major components in phase 3 of the eCourts project. Out of these 24 components, the Department of Justice and the E-Committee have tentatively, I say tentatively because it's subject to discussion with all our high courts, identified 13 components where there may be a need for centralization. And why centralization? The reason for centralization, for instance, is that in the area of digitization and scanning, the Expenditure Finance Committee, while releasing the 7,200 crores to us, has made certain binding recommendations. Among those binding recommendations is that scanning and digitization must be subject to open price market discovery. We envisage that about 3,108 crore documents would be digitized at a certain per page estimation. The Expenditure Finance Committee has highlighted that perhaps if you were to scale up and subject your digitization estimates to open market discovery mechanisms, the price per page will radically reduce. Now, the need, therefore, for this is that we need to have a centralized national agency. I'm conscious of the fact that several high courts have already begun the process of digitization. So when we have a uniform national agency, some of the best market players in India who are involved in the process of digitization across India, we'll have to take into account the work of digitization which has already been done, whether it be Odisha or Delhi or Karnataka or Kerala. The idea is not to obliterate the work of digitization, but take into now account the work which has been done and then look to the future. So apart from the fact that you have digitization and scanning, which has to be subject to open market discovery of pricing, it is important to look at certain other areas as well. The digital infrastructure which we intend to create, and which is my next slide, is firstly paperless courts. Second, virtual courts. Delhi has been leading from the front in the creation of virtual courts, particularly in the area of traffic challans, of which we heard a short while ago. The footprint of the paperless courts has to be expanded. Live streaming, which is dependent on a robust cloud infrastructure. Today, most high courts are doing live streaming on YouTube with the attendant problems which we have been hearing in the earlier part of this presentation this morning by Chief Justice Muralidhar and by Justice Rajesh Bindal. You have these little clips about a judge in the Patna High Court asking an IAS officer as to why he was not appropriately dressed in a suit as opposed to being dressed in only a shirt and a trouser. Or somebody in the Gujarat High Court saying something about, why a lawyer is not ready with her cases. So a lot of funny stuff is going on the YouTube, which we need to control. Because this is serious stuff. What happens in the court is extremely serious stuff. Live streaming that we are doing has a flip side. We as judges need to be trained ourselves because we are now working in the age of social media. Every word which we say in the court is up on the public realm, which we realize when we are hearing the Constitution bench arguments. Very often citizens don't realize that what you say in the course of a hearing of a case is to open up a dialogue. It doesn't reflect what you're going to ultimately decide necessarily in every case. Some cases it may, in some cases it may not. But people don't understand this at large. So live streaming, our interface with social media, places new demands on us as judges. But therefore, we need to create a robust cloud infrastructure for live streaming. And cloud infrastructure perhaps is one way where we have to have a national model, a centralized national cloud infrastructure, not in terms just of price discovery, but of upscaling our activities. We'll also have to have additional hardware for new courts, renewable energy. The next important area which I want to emphasize is the technological advancements which the Phase 3 document envisages. And this will refer to software development, the use of artificial intelligence, blockchain, and digital accessibility. We are conscious of the fact that artificial intelligence has the flip side as well. For instance, we would be very difficult and diffident in allowing artificial intelligence to tell us what sentence to hand down following a conviction in a criminal case. Many courts across the world have experimented with it. I don't think that we as judges would ever want to cede our discretion, which we exercise on sound judicial lines, in terms of sentencing policy. At the same time, artificial intelligence is replete with possibilities. It's now par for the course in a hearing in the Supreme Court to have a record of 10,000 pages or 15,000 pages. Appeals which come to us from the specialized tribunals, like the Airtel, the Electricity Tribunal, or the Competition Commission, have huge records. How do you expect a judge to digest evidence in a statutory appeal in a record involving 15,000 pages? Artificial intelligence can prepare the entire record for you. Or, for instance, we have been using artificial intelligence for transcription of the proceedings in the Constitution bench of the Supreme Court. Simultaneously with the arguments, we have a screen in the court in which the entire oral argument is transcripted. At the end of the day, the transcript is provided to all the lawyers to clean up any errors which may have taken place. There were very funny errors which sometimes takes place. One of the arguments made by the lawyer for the petitioner was confused with the lawyer for the government of India. It was obviously cleaned up by the end of the day when the lawyers notice it, and then it is put out on the website for public consumption. But transcription is another AI-assisted activity which we are in the process of implementing. As you know, we are now launched into translation of judgments of the Supreme Court. There are about 34,000 judgments, core 34,000 judgments of the Supreme Court since independence. All of these judgments were digitized by providing an ESCR free of charge. And the idea behind this initiative, which I was pursuing since 2016, but I realized that some things can only be achieved when you become Chief Justice, because perhaps people listen to you better. I don't know what the secret to that is. Justice Muralidhar is also an example of that. What happened is that I thought that we must put out our judgments which should be available free of charge. The private software developers provide great service. But why should it be that a citizen has to pay the kind of charges which are levied by private software developers when our law colleges are not resourced? Our lawyers in the talukas or the district courts are not resourced to pay for the software. In about 2 months after I took charge, we have all the 34,000 judgments now in the form of an ESCR. But we are not stopping at that. What better way, I thought, to provide access to justice to our common citizens than providing our judgments in a language which our citizens understand. Therefore, we are now in the process of using artificial intelligence. IIT Madras, which I believe is going to be making a presentation here, is at the forefront of that activity. But we've also used our retired district judges across high courts to verify the correctness of the translation which is being made before these translated judgments are put out on the internet. The next aspect which I want to, which I would like to stress on is the need for e-seva kendras. Now, e-seva kendras are a core part of our mission in phase 3. E-seva kendras are important because we envisage that we will set up about 4,400 e-seva kendras across India at a budgeted outlay of about 394 crores. Now, an area which I want to throw up for discussion and for reflection by all the colleagues today from all high courts and the CPCs, while setting up e-seva kendras, can we not do something and replicate a pattern similar to, say, the passport centers. This is something which was raised just the other day with me by the team from the Department of Justice. We have passport centers across India which are run by a pan-India agency. There are two critical requirements of e-Seva Kendras. First, a certain degree of uniformity. I have all these inaugurals which I'm invited for across India, and I'm always wary of the fact, is this an inaugural only to have the Chief Justice of India to come and grace that particular event? It's important for us to have uniformity in the kind of facilities which we will be providing to e-Seva Kendras. Now, if you have to have uniformity, you can scale it up. You obviously cannot have the same e-Seva Kendra for a court establishment which has, say, 5 courts, with a court establishment which has 150 courts in UP. But you must therefore have a uniformity of facilities which we will provide in e-Seva Kendras, and then scale it up depending upon the footfalls, depending upon the number of cases, depending upon the number of judges, depending upon the number of lawyers who have access to that court on a daily basis. Cloud by default is, as the next slide indicates, one of the key missions of phase 3. In other words, all applications will have to be migrated on cloud. We must provide for a redundant and robust connectivity. We have just heard a short while ago of the serious problems of connectivity which we have across India. But the answer to that will be by having maybe one or a few agencies which will really provide for redundant connectivity. Disaster recovery. Cybersecurity. On cybersecurity, I have constituted a committee. Most of the committees which I constituted during the pandemic, for instance, I constituted a committee on live streaming rules. I constituted a committee on preparing e-filing rules. We constituted a committee on an SOP for digitization. The committee on SOP for digitization was obviated by one basic aspect, namely, what happens if the technology which we adopt today becomes obsolescent? At least I grew up. Many of the young judges here may not have grown up in the same age in which I grew up, but I grew up in an area when you had these records, the long playing and the short playing records. They gave way to your cassettes with the spools, then the smaller cassettes, then the CDs. I still have a CD player, but it is absolutely redundant because nobody plays CDs anymore. What happens if the same thing happens to our digitized record? How do we ensure that this huge outlay of public funds does not become redundant? And therefore, we constituted a committee on SOP for an SOP on digitization, of which Mr. Katre from CDAC, who's going to speak to you, was a very integral part. All these committees have done their work, but there's one committee which is still doing its work. And that's the committee which is chaired by Justice Rajiv Shakdar. Many of these others were also chaired by him. One of the committees is the Committee on Cybersecurity and Data Security and Privacy. And naturally, that committee is taking time because that is the most difficult part of our work. How do we ensure data security? And how do we ensure data privacy? We have opened up our APIs, our application programming interfaces, to all government departments as step 1. Recently, we shared our APIs with a governmental agency. Before we realized that government agency had put up the APIs across India for public consumption, we had to scramble and request them to pull back the APIs from the public domain because we said, look, we can't put these APIs for public consumption across India for the reason that this deals with very sensitive data of individuals, marital problems, child sexual abuse, gender violence, commercial confidences. So we are in the process of evolving a national model for data security and privacy. And the moment that is done, I think we would have achieved a very major step. On digitization, I want to highlight a few key areas. First, digitization of court records. I've already spoken about the digitization SOP. The next, which is a very important aspect of phase 3, which is establishing a judicial data preservation software, which we would need to establish for data security. The next catering born digital data, because now what will happen is in phase 3, a lot of our data would be born digital. We would not be scanning data which was either in the paper form or scanning something which was e-filed, but it will be born digital data. So how do we cater to the born digital data? And then finally, moving towards and enabling a paperless court. In the next slide, I've already referred to the e-Seva Kendras. We also need to have a robust e-filing platform. We are now on the anvil of e-filing 4.0. Video conferencing, which I've already spoken of. There's an area which I would like to refer to on video conferencing. The Parliamentary Standing Committee on the Department of Justice visited the Supreme Court on 2 occasions. It was in fact not a part of conventional protocol for the Supreme Court to engage with the Parliamentary Standing Committee. But I got a request from Mr. Sushil Modi, who chairs the Parliamentary Standing Committee, and he very graciously asked me as to whether the Supreme Court E-Committee would be willing to engage with the Parliamentary Standing Committee. I consulted Chief Justice Ramana, who was my Chief Justice, and he said, brother, if you have no problem, I have no difficulty. And I engaged with a host of members of Parliament across political lines. And I can share with you that there was just a sense of awe at the work which has been done by the Indian judiciary, particularly in the ICT area through the pandemic. And part of the reason why we were able to sustain the budget which we had planned is because of the robust support which we got from the Parliamentary Standing Committee. Thereafter, the same Parliamentary Standing Committee came to engage with the Supreme Court in its activities with NALSA, which is chaired by Justice Sanjay Kishan Paul. Now, one very important part which the Parliamentary Standing Committee made before us was this. They said that when we visited various high courts, we found that so much of the technology infrastructure which has been set up is obsolete in the sense it's not being used by the high courts at all. Screens, the computers are just put away in a portion of the court as a sort of a reminder that we used technology at some point of time in the past. The Parliamentary Committee had a very cogent point. All these public funds which we are utilizing, does it make sense if so many high courts are just discarding the infrastructure which we have set up? Now, I explained to the Parliamentary Committee that what you see at the front end of the High Court is not all the technology that we have. The whole High Court infrastructure is running on technology. So maybe some High Courts have now disbanded the video conferencing equipment, but that doesn't take away from the fact that the infrastructure is still in place. But I've written to all Chief Justices of the High Courts, informing about these concerns and requesting them not to disband the infrastructure which we created during the pandemic. Now, most Chief Justices have written to me saying that we have so many video conferencing equipments in place in the court. Question is not about the fact that we have these video conferencing facilities in the courts. Question is, are we using them? I get a lot of PILs as Chief Justice of India in the Supreme Court of India. Lawyers across India, whether it's from the Punjab and Haryana High Court or the Bombay High Court or some other High Court, telling us that, well, hybrid hearings have been stopped by the High Courts. Our High Courts have just shut down hybrid hearings. I would like to appeal to our Chief Justices and to all the chairpersons of the ICT committees, please don't disband the infrastructure which we created during the pandemic. COVID-19 provided us a justification. It was an imperative. But technology is not something which was confined only to the COVID-19 pandemic. We must look beyond the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm sure that the High Court Chief Justices and all of you who will go back home to your respective states will take this up further. And finally, change management, which requires capacity building, process engineering. Process engineering is something that the High Courts have still not looked at. When I was a judge of the Bombay High Court, we began a process engineering initiative for reworking our rules of court so as to re-engineer our rules of court bearing in mind the demands of technology. I believe 10 years after I left the Bombay High Court, process engineering rules have yet to be formulated. And I'm sure I dare say the same thing is all over the country. So process engineering cannot just be one blip on the horizon of phase 3 of the e-courts project. All of you will need to engage with your colleagues who are in the rules committee and ensure that we take this up very seriously and bring about process engineering. So many of our civil manuals, our criminal manuals, are completely geared to a different era when you had to actually serve summons on horseback or on camel. They're not geared for the technology that we are employing today. So this is something which is very key for all of you to really apply your minds to. Training of all stakeholders. The Supreme Court of India, for instance, is now ready with e-filing. Our e-filing module is completely ready. We have engaged with the bar, we have engaged with the clerks of lawyers on multiple occasions, and we are now doing the final stage. It has undergone the security audits, and we are now doing the final stage. We called it awareness. We have requested teams of lawyers, including the Bar Association, the lawyers themselves, the Supreme Court Advocates on Record Association, to come in groups. And these groups are being made aware of e-filing. We are also training the lawyers' clerks, the munshis, because for them, law courts are the source of livelihood. They can't be left behind in the march of technology. So what we are doing in the Supreme Court now is to train all stakeholders. Our next step is to identify about 10 lawyers who will now be doing all their e-filing in the electronic mode, all their filing in the electronic mode. So the idea is now to have mascots, the representative members of the bar, who will do all the filing that they are going to do in the e-filing mode before we roll it out in the near future as a mandatory form of filing. But here again, I would like to highlight just a few issues. I had a case the other day from the National Company Law Appellate Tribunal, which I must share with you. When I was editing my judgment last night, I thought I must share this example with you. The NCLAT has rules which require that all filing must be by presenting the appeal at the filing counter of the NCLAT. Now, this is true about so many high courts as well. Therefore, I'm sharing this particular example. The issue was, when does limitation stop to run before the NCLAT? When a matter is e-filed, does limitation stop running? Or does limitation stop running only when the physical file is filed? The NCLAT came out with an office order saying that besides e-filing, you must also file your appeals in the physical mode. Now, I do believe that there can be no greater disincentive to a lawyer or a litigant than to require them that apart from e-filing, you must also file an appeal in the physical mode. If you have to file an appeal in the physical mode, the lawyer will ask you one question: why then do I have to file it in the e-filing mode at all? You might as well scan what I'm filing and then present it before your judges in the soft form. So the first thing which high courts need to do, and we've done that in the Supreme Court as well, is that we have ensured that once e-filing is implemented, there should be no requirement of physical filing. Now, obviously, the reason why a particular tribunal said that you must also file physical copies is because the judges of the tribunal were not very comfortable with e-filing. But something which I have said in my judgment, which is that the answer to our unease as judges in handling electronic files is not to burden the litigant by requiring them to file physical files. The answer is simple: just retrain ourselves. During the course of the Constitution Bench, which I've been heading for the last several months, I've ensured that all my colleagues, some of them on the verge of retirement, have gone completely in the electronic mode. And I can only tell you as a mark of my appreciation for a colleague who is almost on the threshold of 65, of the eagerness with which my colleagues have gone into the electronic mode. It's all about a change in mindsets. Technology is meant for dummies. The back end of technology is not meant for dummies, but the front end of technology is really meant for you and me, people who have a basic interest in technology and the ability to use it. That's all. So this is something which I do believe is crucial to our initiative. Why should we really impose burdens? The Supreme Court of India, for instance, had a rule that even when you e-file, the Supreme Court would collect printing charges because the e-files had to be printed by the registry. Now I ask myself the question, does the government of India really depend on a few lakhs of rupees that you generate at the end of the year and deposit in the central treasury on the printing charges we collect for printing of the e-files into physical files? What a great burden on lawyers, on the litigant who has to pay for printing charges. So these are small initiatives. The reason why I thought I might get into some of these, which are boring issues, but only judges will realize them. And most of us have practiced at the bar, and we realize how difficult these issues are for lawyers and for litigants. These are really low-hanging fruit, which each of you need to grasp and to ensure that you deal with them so that we can then change for the better. Just a couple of other thoughts and then I'll be done with my presentation. One, that we are on the anvil as part of our next mission of integrating the ICJS, the Interoperable Criminal Justice System, and the CCTNS with the e-courts project, so that all the data in ICJS and CCTNS can also become a part of the e-courts, and which can be lifted by us, whether it is in terms of the details about the FIRs, the charge sheet, the framing of charges, the evidence which is recorded, and almost everything which leads up to the final judgment in appeal. Last couple of points. One of the things which we envisage in phase 3 now is to have a project management consultant. The reason for the project management consultant whom we have proposed to appoint at a national level is that a lot of work which we are going to do in the E-Committee together with the Department of Justice, such as selection of agencies for centralized implementation or for laying down the specifications, drawing up expressions of interest, the RFP or the request of proposals. We have a few very expert officers across the country. One of them is from Madhya Pradesh, Mr. Kazi, for those of you who have interacted with him, who are experts on drawing up expressions of interest and requests for proposals. I set up within the Supreme Court a technical advisory and a procurement purchase committee. Because honestly, how does my staff in the Supreme Court, or very senior district judges from various states, draw up an EOI or RFP? These are extremely complex issues when you are asking for the submission of tenders. So we thought we must have a project management consultant as part of phase 3, who will assist us in drawing up EOIs, RFPs, drawing up specifications. Finally, we also propose to have a digital courts technology office, which will act as a central procurement agency during the course of the phase 3 of the e-courts project. I've said, as most lawyers say, finally my last 2 points, but before I finish my speech, I realized that I've forgotten 2 more points, and I hope you will give me just 2 minutes of your time, which is a new initiative which we have launched in the Supreme Court, which is iJuris. Now, iJuris is the integrated judicial upgradation and reforms on infrastructure and services. A considerable effort was spent in preparing iJuris by both Mr. Ashish Shirodhonkar of the NIC, who is really a mainstay of the e-courts project, and by my former Secretary General, Mr. Sanjeev Kalgaonkar, who has recently been appointed as a judge of the Madhya Pradesh High Court. If you look at iJuris, and I request all colleagues here to look at iJuris, it has a roll down and drill down feature. I've circulated iJuris to all the Chief Justices of the High Courts just a couple of weeks ago. And we have requested all High Courts to upload data on the infrastructure which is provided within the judiciary in that state. It has data on infrastructure across the spectrum, including how many women's toilets.
देखुले सीजेआईंकर दीक्षांत भाषण देखुले डिजिटाइजेशन को लेकिन पेपरलेस वर्क को लेकिन आसो परवर्ती एक बड़ खबर को विश्व प्रसिद्ध रथयात्रा चली द्वितीय समन्वय बैठक आईन मंत्री जगन्नाथ सरकार अध्यक्षतार बैठक चली बैठक में श्रीमंदिर मुख्य प्रशासक रंजन कुमार दास, मंत्री समीर रंजन दास, प्रफुल्ल मल्लिक, तुषारकांति बेहेरा, प्रीति रंजन घड़ई, उषा देवी, जिलापाल एवं एसपी प्रमुख उपस्थित अच्छा। अंपटे रथखड़ा रथ निर्माण अग्रगति नहीं समीक्षा कर आईन मंत्री एसह रथ निर्माण में नियोजित सेवकों सहित आलोचना कर पुरी रे रथ को नहीं आरंभ होइछि बैठक एवं बैठक रे रथ कार्य को नहीं कि आलोचना चली सहित एथरे पुरी जिलापाल पुरी एसपी एवं श्रीमंदिर मुख्य प्रशासक आदि जोग देइछन्ति एवं किभଳି रथ कार्य सुरुखुरे हेबो ताकू नहीं कि आज विभिन्न गुरुत्वपूर्ण प्रसंग को नहीं कि बैठक रे आलोचना करा जाइछि। श्रृंखलित रथयात्रा पर द्वितीय समन्वय कमिटी बैठक बसी आईन मंत्री अध्यक्षतार बैठक बसी जो पुरी जिलापाल जोग देइछन्ति श्रीमंदिर मुख्य प्रशासक पुरी एसपी एवं तमाम सेवायत वरिष्ठ अधिकारी जोग देइछन्ति जेहेतु महाप्रभुंकर रथयात्रा पाखे आसलानी ताकू दृष्टि रखी द्वितीय समन्वय बैठक बसी एवं अनेक गुड़े गुरुत्वपूर्ण प्रसंग को लेकिन बैठक रे आलोचना होइछि किभଳି श्रृंखलित रथयात्रा हेबो ताकू नहीं बैठक रे आलोचना चली। आईन मंत्री जगन्नाथ सरकार अध्यक्षतार बैठक चली एवं बैठक रे श्रीमंदिर मुख्य प्रशासक रंजन कुमार दास मंत्री समीर रंजन दास प्रफुल्ल मल्लिक तुषारकांति बेहेरा प्रीतिचंदन घड़ई एवं उषा देवी जिलापाल और एसपी प्रमुख जोग देइछन्ति। रथखଳାରେ रथ निर्माण अग्रगति नहीं समीक्षा करिसेंति आईन मंत्री। विश्व प्रसिद्ध रथयात्रा चली द्वितीय समन्वय बैठक आईन मंत्री जगन्नाथ सरकार अध्यक्षतार चली बैठक रे श्रीमंदिर मुख्य प्रशासक रंजन कुमार दास जोग देइछन्ति सहित मंत्री समीर रंजन दास प्रफुल्ल मल्लिक एवं तुषारकांति बेहेरा प्रीतिरंजन घड़ई उषा देवी जिलापाल और एसपी प्रमुख जोग देइछन्ति। अन्यपटे रथखଳାରେ रथ निर्माण अग्रगति नहीं समीक्षा करिसेंति आईन मंत्री। आगको रथयात्रा खूब कम दिन रही भितर किभଳି सुरुखुरे शांति श्रृंखलार सहित रथयात्रा हेबो ताकू नै कि बैठक अनुष्ठित होइछि।
जमी समुचित भाव में श्रृंखलित भाव में हेब से गुरुत्वारोप करुचु विगत किछि दिन धरी जिलापाल एवं एसपी महोदय सहित मिसी विभिन्न विषय पर तर्जमा कर सब व्यवस्थित ढंग से करने प्रयास आरंभ करूँ। आपण समस्त सहयोग आशीर्वाद और शुभकामना को बाध्य कर वैतरणी निश्चित भाव में पारी हेबा बोली आशा रखीछु। पुणी थे आपण समस्त अकुंठ सहयोग कामना करुच्ची। महाप्रभु आम समस्त सहाय हूँ। जय जगन्नाथ।
विश्व प्रसिद्ध रथयात्रा चली द्वितीय समन्वय बैठक ए बैठक रे रथयात्रा किभଳି श्रृंखलित हेबो एवं कौन कौन असुविधा रही सुविधा रही ताकू नहीं आलोचना करा जायछि ए बैठक रे एवं आ खूब कम दिन रही रथयात्रा को सहित रथखଳାରେ रथ काम केते दूर आगे ताकू नहीं आईन मंत्री खुद समीक्षा करिसेंति। ए बैठक रे श्रीमंदिर मुख्य प्रशासक जोग देइछन्ति पुरी जिलापाल उपस्थित अछन्ति एथि सहित पुरी एसपी मध्य जोग देइछन्ति। बैठक रे श्रीमंदिर मुख्य प्रशासक सहित मंत्री समीर रंजन दास प्रफुल्ल मल्लिक तुषारकांति बेहेरा प्रीतिरंजन घड़ई उषा देवी जिलापाल आदि जोग देइछन्ति। आईन मंत्री अध्यक्षतार बैठक चली। श्रीमंदिर जेहेतु महाप्रभुंकर रथयात्रा पाखे आसिलानी एवं रथयात्रा किभଳି सुरुखुरे हेबो शांति श्रृंखलारे हेबो ताकू नै कि ए बैठक अनुष्ठित होउछि। एथसह रथखଳାରେ रथ काम केते दूर आगेछि ताकू नै मध्य आलोचना करिसेंति समीक्षा करिसेंति आईन मंत्री। ए बैठक रे जोग दैछन्ति श्रीमंदिर मुख्य प्रशासक समीर रंजन दास प्रफुल्ल मल्लिक मंत्री समीर रंजन दास तुषारकांति बेहेरा प्रीतिरंजन घड़ई एवं जिलापाल आदि जोग दैछन्ति। रथ काम केते दूर आगेछि एथि सहित रथयात्रा आगक आसबाक जाउछि कौन कौन काम बाकी रही एवं किभଳି सुरुखुरे शांति श्रृंखलार सहित रथयात्रा हेबो ताकू नै बैठक होइछि। आम सहित आलोचना करिया पे सुनील जोग देइछन्ति। सुनील द्वितीय समन्वय बैठक चली रथयात्रा कौन कौन आलोचना सब चली
देखो मुख्यतः आम जी कहवा देखिए रथयात्रा द्वितीय समन्वय कमिटी बैठक और समन्वय कमिटी बैठक मुख्यतः आईन मंत्री अध्यक्षतार आईन मंत्री जे रही जगन्नाथ सरकार अध्यक्षता रही बेले शिक्षा मंत्री समीर रंजन दास और नगर उन्नयन मंत्री उषा देवी और स्पोर्ट्स मिनिस्टर जे रही तुषारकांति बेहेरा खनि मंत्री जी रही खनि इस्पात मंत्री प्रफुल्ल मल्लिक और पुरी विधायक जयंत षडंगी और अन्य अधिकारी मैंने श्रीमंदिर मुख्य प्रशासक कहतु जिलापाल कहतु उपजिलापाल कहतु पुलिस एडीजी आरके शर्मा प्रमुख उपस्थित रही मुख्यतः आम जदि कहवा समस्त माने किभली भाव में आगको रथयात्रा हम अति श्रृंखलित भाव में हम एवं कौन कौन व्यवस्था रही रथयात्रा जो विभाग अधिकारी मैंने रही मुख्यतः
रथयात्रा जो विभाग अधिकारी मैंने रही मुख्यतः लाइन विभाग रही लाइन डिपार्टमेंट रही से कि कार्य अग्रगति से कार्यर समीक्षा करा मुख्यतः नाल नर्दमा सफा जेहेतु पूर्वी सहर सबुठ बड़ समस्या रही है स्वास्थ्य समस्या रही है कारण रथयात्रा समय आम देखीचे लक्षाधिक भक्त श्रद्धालुंकर गहली रही है श्रीक्षेत्रपुर में ये नवदिनात्मक यात्रा जो प्रबल लोक होता है मुख्यतः किभली भाव में स्वास्थ्य समस्या को गुरुत्व दि जापर मुख्यतः नजर दि जाए अतिरिक्त आम्बुलांस एवं जो मुख्यतः फास्ट एड सेंटर को आरंभ कर विभिन्न आशु चिकित्सा केन्द्र मान किभली भाव में सहर सारा खोल जापर मुख्यतः नजर दि जाए कौन कौन अग्रगति नहीं समीक्षा करा जेहेतु पुरी सहर में प्राय 400 ऊर्ध्व छोट बड़ नला रही से नल गुड़िक केमती सफा कर आवश्यक स्थले कि पंप लग जाए कौन असुविधा हुए वाटर लिकेज समस्या रही है केमती निष्कासन कर वर्षा हुए जदि कौटी फ्लड भली कृत्रिम बन्या भली स्थिति उपजे ताकू किभली भाव में व्यवस्था कर मुख्यतः किभली भाव में नजर दि जाए विभाग अधिकारी मैंने कौन कौन से नहीं व्यवस्था ग्रहण कर मुख्यतः से उपर आलोचना करपटे आईन श्रृंखला स्थिति उपर कौन कौन मुख्यतः नजर दि जापर आलोचना मुख्यतः जेहेतु आम कहीपर रथ निर्माण कार्य बर्तमान आरंभ हो गला रथ पवित्र अक्षय तृतीया दिन ठारू केते काठ आसी पहुँची आउ केते काठर आवश्यकता रही अंपटे आम जदि कहवा से रथ निर्माण शैली किभली भाव में किभली भाव में कार्यक्रम करा रथ निर्माण रथयात्रार अव्यवहित पूर्व किभली भाव में कार्य समापन हम तापर मुख्यतः नजर दि जाए कारण किसी समय पूर्व मीटिंग आरंभ हवा पूर्व आम जदि कहवा जे आईन मंत्री रही जगन्नाथ सरकार से निजे जाई रथ खलारे 3 रथर मुख्य महाराणा सह मुख्यतः आलोचना करथिले रथ कार्य किभली भाव में चली कौन असुविधा रही आउ केते काठर आवश्यकता रही धार्य समय पूर्व किभली भाव में काठ पहुँचब से नहीं रथ तत्वावधारक जी रही सुदर्शन मेकअप मुख्यतः आलोचना करते आम कहीपर समस्त दिग को मुख्यतः तार नजर दि जाऊँगी जहाँ कह रथयात्रा किभली भाव में श्रृंखलित कर मोटामुटी भाव में नजर दि जाए बैठक कर समस्त विभाग अधिकारी मुख्यतः आलोचना कर
निहाती सुंदर ताकू नहीं आलोचना जारी रही किभली श्रृंखलित रथयात्रा हेबो ताकू नहीं बैठक आलोचना करा जाउछि किंतु किछि जो माने सेवायत उपस्थित अछन्ते से माने किछि उद्वेगजनक प्रसंग उठाउछन्ते कि किछि रथयात्रा रे जदि विशृंखला हुए बा ताकू नहीं किछि से माने निजर दाबी रखुछन्ते कि रथयात्रा ए बैठक रे द्वितीय समन्वय बैठक रे निज तरफ किछि दाबी रखुछन्ते सेवायत माने
देखो किसी समय पूर्व बैठक आरंभ होती बैठक आम जब कह 2 घंटा धरी बैठक चलो मध्य सेवायत मानक कहबार सुजोग दिज्व जदि जो किसी समस्या रही है जेहेतु आम 4/2023 तारीख में से 11/4/2023 तारीख में मुख्यतः स्वास्थ्य समस्या एवं वाटर लिकेज बा जो हम कह नाल नर्दमा सफा एवं पूरा परिमल व्यवस्था या ऊपर किभली भाव में नजर दिज्व मुख्यतः मुख्य प्रसंग रही है तेणुकर से प्रसंग को पुनर्बार दोहरा विद्युत समस्या जेहेतु आम सहर में कारण आईन श्रृंखला स्थिति विद्युत समस्या एवं ये जोड़िक जो प्रसंग रोचे या किभली भाव में नियंत्रण कर मुख्यतः सेवायत मानकर पूर्व बैठक में दाबी रही है चलित बैठक में दाबी रही कहीपर तेणुक आउ किसी समय पर स्पष्ट हम कौन सेवायत मान निजर दाबी रखुच्च पूर्व बैठक में जो दाबी रखी
स्पष्ट हम कि सेवायत मैंने कौन दाबी रखुच्च सहित जेहेतु आगो को रथयात्रा रोचे विश्व प्रसिद्ध रथयात्रा किभली श्रृंखलित हम ताकू नहीं आज द्वितीय बैठक चली द्वितीय समन्वय बैठक बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद आम सहित सुनील जोड़ी होते बीजेडी प्रार्थी दीपाली दास को समर्थन घोषणा कले झारसुगुड़ा किसान समाज झारसुगुड़ा निर्वाचन मंडली स्तरीय किसान समाज सम्मेलन में ए घोषणा करिछि समाज झारसुगुड़ा निर्वाचन मंडली में 45,000 अधिक किसान समाज भोटर अछंती मुख्यमंत्री नवीन पट्टनायक स्वच्छ शासन और निर्मल भावमूर्ति और विकास कार्य बीजेडी प्रार्थी को समर्थन घोषणा करिछि किसान समाज
आमर मंगला किसान आज्ञा नेतृत्व में आज आयोजन कर समाज अन्न कथा मानिक अलग अलग दिग्रे जावा लगे उद्यम करुले आम महिला किसान आज्ञा ना देखिकी आम देखिक निजर लोग आम जाति बंधु हिसाब से समस्ते एक होकर अच्छू आ महिला के संगे चलीचु आम किसान समाज में बीजेडी के समर्थन करूँ आगे आ नवीन पट्टनायक संगे आम आगे बढ़मु आ हाथ मुठा के आट करमु बोली आम समस्त ये अच्छे।
नवीन बाबू किसान समाज रो उन्नति पाई चाषी मानकर उन्नति पाई जो विभिन्न कार्यक्रम करिसेंती एजुकेशन रो डेवलपमेंट पाई आदिवासी मानकर जो विभिन्न अनुष्ठान गठन करिसेंती एपरिकी आदिवासी लोक मानकर शिक्षार प्रसार पाई समस्त प्रकार व्यवस्था लोन ठू आरंभ करके समस्त प्रकार व्यवस्था करथिबारु आज किसान समाज रो झारसुगुड़ा निर्वाचन मंडली रो भाई भौणी माने नवीन पट्टनायक को धन्यवाद देबा पाई ये सम्मेलन आयोजन करा जायछि।
जो आमर समाज टिके जति विकास करबा कथा करिनी आमे ताकू आखि आगे तांको रखिलु मुख्यमंत्री ये गोचर रे मुख्यमंत्री हमको आश्वासन देइछंती तमर समाज को निश्चित आकार रे मो सहाय्य करिवि आउ सेति पई आमे तो तांको बाध्य ये पूरा बहुत तामने कृतज्ञता ज्ञापन करिके आमे धन्यवाद जणाउछु।
अधिक आलोचना पे अपने आम सहित जोड़ी अपने किसान समाज समर्थन रही झारसुगुड़ा निर्वाचन रे जेहेतु बीजेडी प्रार्थी करिछि दीपाली दास को एथि सहित कृषकों समस्या नहीं अनेक किछि समाधान देइछथि राज्य सरकार से दृष्टि बीजेडी को समर्थन दोछि किसान समाज।
देखो झारसुगुड़ा निर्वाचन मंडली स्तरीय किसान समाज सम्मेलन अनुष्ठित होउछि। आमे जदि कहबा ताहले जो किसान समाज रो कार्यकर्ता अछंती एठी 500 रु अधिक कर्मकर्ता उपस्थित अछंती एवं सेमाने बिजू जनता दल प्रार्थी दीपाली दास को समर्थन घोषणा करिसंती तेणु निश्चित
निर्वाचन मंडली किसान समाज
तेणु झारसुगुड़ा निर्वाचन मंडली स्तरीय किसान समाज सम्मेलन आज अनुष्ठित होती बीजेडी प्रार्थी दीपाली दास को समर्थन घोषणा करिसेंती एवं मुख्यमंत्री नवीन पट्टनायक जेहेतु स्वच्छ शासन निर्मल भावमूर्ति एवं सुंदरगढ़ जिला जो विकास कार्य करिसेंती से विकास कार्य को समर्थन करी बिजू जनता दल प्रार्थी को समर्थन घोषणा करिसेंती एवं झारसुगुड़ा निर्वाचन मंडली रे आपनकर 45,000 रु अधिक भोटर अच्छा किसान समाज तेणु निश्चित भाव में एटी किसान समाज जो कार्यकर्ता अच्छा सीधा सड़क मतामत लबा आप देखो आज मुख्यमंत्री को धन्यवाद दौरान मुख्यमंत्री को धन्यवाद दौरान ता सहित बीजेडी प्रार्थी को समर्थन करिसेंती कौन कहे
निश्चित सर आम जेहेतु झारसुगुड़ा निर्वाचन मंडल जो दुखद खबर है स्वर्गत नवकिशोर दास ये आकस्मिक निधन हो गला तांकर जगह को पूरण करवार लगी एवं जेन सानी निर्वाचनटा चलुचे से आम आज किसान समाज तो पर गर्वित हेबू कहीं जेन जगह जेन जिनिसटा आम भुवनेश्वर रे पाइसु जेन जिनिसटा आमर संविधान जेहेतु आमर भुवनेश्वर रे पाइसु सेटा आज आम झारसुगुड़ा रे पाइछु से लोक मानकु जेन माने आमर राज्य को चलाउछंती से लोक मानकु पाइछु आ मुख्यमंत्री आमर दाबी केते आमे दाबी प्रकाश करथिलु सेटा हमको आश्वासन देइछंती तुमर दाबी पूरण हेबा सेति पई आमे मुख्यमंत्री को धन्यवाद देबु सर।
निश्चित भाव में किसान समाज मुख्यमंत्री नवीन पट्टनायक को धन्यवाद जनाउछंती आज्ञा कौन कहबे आज्ञा मुख्यमंत्री को आज किसान समाज धन्यवाद जनाउछंती
मुख्यमंत्री को आमे मुख्यमंत्री ओडिशार मुख्यमंत्री आमको माने मने करिसंती जहाँ भी हो आम किसान समाज को से आम बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद देबू आम जहाँ भी अनुरोध करूँ आम अनुरोध रक्षा करें एवं आम प्रति से दृष्टि देले यहीटा ही आम बढ़िया
निश्चित भाव में कारण किसान समाज जो सम्मेलन से मुख्यमंत्री नवीन पट्टनायक को धन्यवाद जनाउछंती कृतज्ञता प्रकाश करुछंती एवं किसान समाज जो 45,000 भोटर अच्छा से बीजेडी प्रार्थी दीपाली दास को समर्थन घोषणा करुछंती आज्ञा कौन कहबे आपनकर आज सम्मेलन बीजेडी प्रार्थी को आपण समर्थन घोषणा करले।
हाँ निश्चय आज्ञा आज किसान समाज महासम्मेलन में करवा जाऊँ इन्हें आमर मंगला किसान का तत्वावधान आम समस्त एक होकर नवीन पट्टनायक समर्थन करूँ दीपाली दास के आम बहुत संख्यार जययुक्त करमु बोले आमर पूरा दृढ़ विश्वास अच्छे पूरा।
निश्चित भाव में किसान समाज सम्मिलन में बीजेडी प्रार्थी दीपाली दास को समर्थन घोषणा करते मुख्यमंत्री नवीन पट्टनायक जो स्वच्छ शासन निर्मल भावमूर्ति विकास कार्य से आकर्षित होती तेणु से धन्यवाद अर्पण करुँच मुख्यमंत्री नवीन पट्टनायक को बीजेडी प्रार्थी दीपाली दास को समर्थन घोषणा करती वरिष्ठ नेता पूर्वतन विधायक मंगला किसान अच्छा आज्ञा देखु आज किसान समाज बीजेडी को समर्थन घोषणा करते कौन कहे
प्रकृति में आमर किसान समाज भाई भौणी माने बिजू बाबू समय ही दल सहित संपृक्त अच्छा बिजू बाबूंकर परे एवं नवीन बाबूंकर सहित अच्छा नवीन पट्टनायक सहित अच्छा नवीन सरकार अच्छा ये जे तांकर एजुकेशन रे जलसेचन रे ग्रामांचल रास्ता घाट डेवलपमेंट रे ओडिशार सर्वांगीण उन्नति पाई नवीन पट्टनायक ओडिशार मुख्यमंत्री हैला परे जो डेवलपमेंट होउची विकास धारा बही चली तेणु आम समाज गाँ गंडारे बास करुवा सबू परिवार नवीन पट्टनायक सहित अच्छा नवीन परिवार रे सामिल होती
निश्चित किसान समाज खाली नुहे झारसुगुड़ा निर्वाचन मंडली में आम देखु विभिन्न राजनीतिक दलर नेताकर्मी बीजेपी नेताकर्मी कांग्रेस नेताकर्मी विजु जनता दल में दैनिक शह शह संख्यार सामिल होती विभिन्न संगठन समाज कार्यकर्ता सामिल होती कर्मी सामिल होती आज्ञा कौन कहे ये जो भल पाइबा दिनक दिन बीजेडी प्रति बढ़ी बढ़ी चली कौन कारण
एकमात्र कारण हूँ माननीय मुख्यमंत्री नवीन पट्टनायक जो ओडिशा को एक नंबर राज्य करिवार जो स्वप्न ताकू साकार करिवार जो रास्ता परिकल्पना सबुतक लोकों पाखे सीधा सड़क भाव में पहुँचुची जो मझे किसी बाट मारणार संभावना ये ना नवीन बाबू समय से सबुत बड़ कथा आज आप किसान समाज देखिले 45,000 भोटर 60,000 उपर लोक ये किसान समाज अच्छा जो माने निर्विवाद नेता नवीन पट्टनायक बोली से ग्रहण कर एकमात्र कारण हूँ जहाँ दरकार जमी परिवार बापा पाखे जहाँ डिमांड कराए से फुलफिल करती से भाव में जेकोसी दाबी नवीन बाबू मानी आज और सहीटा हूँ सबुठ चमत्कार कथा जे नवीन बाबू सामने से सीधा सड़क जड़ित होकर अच्छा आपन किस समय पूर्व कहते अंचल निर्विवाद नेता मंगला भाई मंगला किसान कहते जी कि बिजू बाबू समय से गोटे बढ़िया कथा कहले जे बिजू बाबू समय किसान समाज जोड़ी होकर अच्छी सागरे पुओं समय नवीन पट्टनायक समय बिजू जनता दल सांगे समग्र किसान समाज आज जोड़ी होकर अच्छी आज किसी से दाबी अच्छी जहाँ को पचार कथा हूँ कहली आप दाबी कौन फुलफिल हम ना आज्ञा 100 भाग नवीन बाबू आम दाबीटा को मानि नेबे एवं ये जो प्रकार कॉन्फिडेंस जे मो बापा मो घर मुरबी को गोटे कथा कहबी से मो कथाटा जमती हेले रखिबे एइटा ही आज आप देखो ये लोक जगह हूँ ना आज्ञा जेतिकी लोक एक्सपेक्ट करा जाउतला ताटू यथेष्ट अधिका लोक आज आसिक पहुँचती बहुत लोक बाहर अच्छा आम चेष्टा करुँ भितर आड़िकी रखापी और चमत्कार आपण लोकों भितर आप जेको साधारण लोक पचार दिखाँ आज यही कथाटा भितर अच्छी ये केवल निर्वाचनी कथा नुहे आज्ञा ये हूँ गोटे लोकर भल मनीष पड़िया गोटे लोकर पारिबा पणिया उपर से भरसा अच्छी से हूँ नवीन पट्टनायक
निश्चित भाव में कारण किसान समाज जो कार्यकर्ता अच्छा से बहु संख्यार उपस्थित अच्छा धन्यवाद देते मुख्यमंत्री नवीन पट्टनायक स्वच्छ शासन निर्मल भावमूर्ति और आपणकर जो विकास कार्य करते सामिल होती आपणकर बिजू जनता दल प्रार्थी दीपाली दास को समर्थन घोषणा कर मुख्यमंत्री नवीन पट्टनायक सहित से अच्छा आज्ञा देखो कौन कहे आप ये जो भल पाइबा दिन दिन बीजेडी प्रति बढ़ी बढ़ी चली
निश्चित रूपे आज गोटे खुशी दिन जे कि आमर किसान समाज समर्थन देती निश्चित रूपे आहरी स्ट्रेंथन हम अब नवता
देखो सुश्री जमती आपणकर झारसुगुड़ा निर्वाचन मंडली स्तरीय किसान समाज सम्मिलन आज अनुष्ठित होती सम्मिलन में आप घोषणा कर बिजू जनता दल प्रार्थी दीपाली दास को समर्थन करेंगे मुख्यमंत्री नवीन पट्टनायक जो स्वच्छ शासन निर्मल भावमूर्ति विकास कार्य
भावमूर्ति एवं विकास मंत्र या लोक मैंने समर्थन कर बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद आम आलोचना करते अवनी सहित जो किसान समाज झारसुगुड़ा बीजेडी को समर्थन देछि राष्ट्रपति 3 दिनिया ओडिशा गस्तर आज हूँ शेष दिन अंतिम दिवस रे महाराजा श्री रामचंद्र भंजदेव विश्वविद्यालय समावर्तन उत्सव में सामिल होती राष्ट्रपति सेठारे छात्र छात्री उद्देश्य दीक्षांत भाषण देवे। यह अवसर में मांकिडिया लोधा आदि केतक आदिम जनजातिर प्रतिनिधि को भेटे राष्ट्रपति एसह 90 जन गवेषकों को पीएचडी उपाधि 8 जन व्यक्तिविशेष को डिलीट 34 जन कृति छात्र छात्री को स्वर्ण पदक प्रदान करेंगे। अपराह्न नुआदिल्ली फेरीजे राष्ट्रपति हेबा परे प्रथम थर कर जन्ममाटी आसी महामहिम निज गाँ पहाड़पुर जाई स्वर्गत श्यामचरण मुर्मू प्रतिमूर्ति में माल्यार्पण करते सहित विभिन्न कार्यक्रम में जोग देते। सेभଳି गतकाली द्वितीय दिन में रायरंगपुर स्थित शिव मंदिर जगन्नाथ मंदिर परिदर्शन पर पंडित रघुनाथ मुर्मू समाधि पीठ में देते श्रद्धांजलि एसहित शिमिलीपाल भी बुली देखी।
I request the Honorable Chancellor to sign the record of degrees.
तीन दिनिया ओडिशा गस्तरे अछंती राष्ट्रपति एसहित आज महाराजा श्री रामचंद्र भंजदेव विश्वविद्यालय समावर्तन उत्सव में सामिल होइछंती राष्ट्रपति जोठी किछ समय पर निजर दीक्षांत अभिभाषण रखिबे राष्ट्रपति एवं जो माने 90 जन गवेषक अछंती तांको पीएचडी उपाधि मध्य प्रदान करा जिवो। एथिसह ए अवसर में मांकिडिया और लोधा आदि केतक आदिम जनजातिर प्रतिनिधि को भेटिबे राष्ट्रपति महामहिम राष्ट्रपति द्रौपदी मुर्मू।
I request Honorable Chancellor to address the convocation.